Hi there, welcome to my channel. This video is a part of my series on studying personality types for high performance. A quick introduction about me. I'm Purva Hulke and I work as a high performance coach, helping business owners and entrepreneurs get things done faster with less stress. So the reason why I have started this series is to help my clients get a thorough understanding of their personalities so that they can use this understanding to craft their personalized path towards achieving high performance and optimal productivity. With that being said, let's get into the overview. In the past class, we discussed what are the parts of consciousness, what are functions, attitudes, and we also looked into the derivation of 8 psychological types as described by Carl Jung. In today's class, we would be understanding how to translate different MBTI codes into a hierarchy of the 8 psychological types and vice versa. Then we would understand what is hierarchy of function, what is dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, inferior. And we would also discuss the 8 function model and then the next class topic. Okay, let's understand the basic MBTI code. So all the 16 types of personalities or MBTI types is made up, each personality type is made up of 4-letter code. And we will learn how to determine each letter in different personalities. So step 1 is determining the first letter. The first letter determines your energy orientation. You need to ask yourself, where is your energy directed? Is it directed outwards on the outer world, people and activities? Then you might be an extrovert. If it's directed towards your inner world, towards your inner thoughts, inner reflection, then you might be an introvert. All right. So we both have extroverted and introverted sides to us, but one of them is dominant. So we have to think, what is the dominant energy orientation of mine? So that will determine your first letter, E or I. Next, you determine, second letter determines your information gathering style. How do you prefer to take in information? Do you tend to use more of your senses? You try to focus on real, tangible facts and present realities, or do you tend to use more of your intuition? So you try to think of different ideas, patterns, and possibilities of future. So that's your intuition. So the second letter is either sensing or intuition, your preference to take in information. Now, the third letter determines your decision-making style, T versus F. How do you make decisions? Do you tend to use logic, objectivity? Then you might be a thinking type, or you tend to prioritize making decisions based on your personal values. You tend to consider the emotional impact of situation. Then you might be a feeling type. All right, so that's your third letter, T versus F, T or F. And the fourth letter determines your lifestyle preference, J or P. All right. So you need to ask yourself, how do you like to deal with the outer world? Do you prefer to be organized, structure, and create a lot of plans? Then you might be a judging type. Okay, judging does not mean that you judge people. It's just a preference. We use J. Judging, as we discussed in the past class, it's judging process as also decision-making process, and perceiving is your information gathering processes. So so J is your preference for structure, and perceiving type of people prefer more flexibility, spontaneity, and adaptability. So that's your fourth letter, J versus P. If you're an organized person, you tend to be a J type. If you like to keep your options open, then you are a P type. So a quick summary would be E or I stands for how you direct your energy. S or N is determines your information gathering preference. T or F determines your decision making preference, and J or P determines your lifestyle preference. All right. So for an example, if we derive for ENFP, E stands for extrovert. They're energized by people. N stands for intuition. They love generating a lot of ideas, and they tend to be very imaginative people. They make decisions via their feelings. They prioritize more emotional harmony over logic and decision. Now, and they have a preference for perceiving, so they tend to be very flexible and open-minded, opposed to being very structured and organized. All right, so that's your ENFP personality type. Now, so that's your basics of how to derive the four-letter code or the basic MBTI code. Now we would also discuss something called as primary function. So according to Jungian psychology, ego consciousness, like we had discussed in the previous class, what is your consciousness? It's that sense of I. So ego consciousness is typically understood as being composed of four primary functions. All right. That's your dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior, which represent the hierarchy of how individual primary accesses and utilizes their different cognitive processes. All right, so the top two functions would be dominant, auxiliary, and the next two of the four would be called as tertiary and inferior, third and the fourth function. All right. Now, in most of the cases, whatever we do, we always rely on two of the processes as a preferred way of accessing information and preferred way of organizing and evaluating that information. That's your dominant and auxiliary. All right, so we have 8 psychological types that we looked into the previous class. We have all within us, but we tend to we prefer to use only 4 in our lifetime, and 2 of them is like makes 90% of your personality. So I'll discuss more on it in a bit. All right. So whenever you arrange different cognitive functions or psychological types in a certain order or hierarchy, what you get is a stack. So every personality type would have its own unique cognitive function stack. The 4-letter personality type code is simply a way to identify what is the order of different functions that appear in each one of us. For example, an INTJ will have introverted intuition as their first dominant process, then extroverted thinking as auxiliary. Whereas for ESFP, the dominant function is extroverted sensing, and their auxiliary tends to be introverted feeling. So I'll discuss more on how we derive this dominant auxiliary. So stay with me for a bit. And now, so the different 16 personality types have their own cognitive function stacks. So I have listed it down here, different stacks. So this is the top of the stack and this is the bottom of the stack. It's last function for every personality type. Now, we will also discuss what is the different hierarchy of the function. Like I discussed just now, the primary functions, dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, inferior. But like, what exactly is that? So each personality, like those in MBTI, INFP, ESTJ, all use 4 main functions or 4 primary functions that we discussed. They are stacked in a hierarchy. All right, all of them are stacked in a hierarchy. So the first function that any personality type uses is called the dominant function. This is your most strongest natural function that shapes your identity. Then you have something called as the parent function or auxiliary, the second function that supports the dominant, that gives the dominant a balance. It will always have an opposite attitude as that of the dominant function. Like if I'm an INFP, my dominant function is introverted feeling. So my auxiliary is extroverted intuition. So it always has the opposite attitude as that of the dominant. Auxiliary has the opposite attitude as that of dominant, which is extroverted. Now, then we have tertiary function, which is like less developed function in the psyche. It improves as we age and mature. And then there is fourth and inferior function. This is your weakest function, and it tends to be more of unconscious, or you can say subconscious. You are tending to be aware of it, but you don't have the competency to use it in a very good way. All right. So each one of has a dominant function that is our strongest function, and that we tend to identify with very much naturally. That's 75% of who you are. Your strong points and the things you are really good at doing will usually be a direct result of your dominant function. Then each one of has an auxiliary function. It's your second strongest function, and it supports the dominant function. It describes about 15% of who you are. So together, the dominant and auxiliary describe about 90% of who we are. And by the age of 20, we develop both these functions. So if you know someone's dominant and auxiliary function, you can predict many things about their behavior and their preferences. And this is the key to understanding people who are very different from us. Now, the third and the fourth function, as I said before, it develops later on in your life. They tend to represent the areas where we are challenged, areas where we might be weak or troubled, and they can be predicted by knowing your third and fourth function. We also have fifth and eighth functions. There are total 8 functions that we use, but your fifth to eight functions are unconscious, and you are normally not aware of them. They tend to be very weak, and they tend to pop up and surprise you under stress. But if you are able to unlock third, fourth, and till the 8 functions, there is nothing like it. It's the same as unlocking your genius. That is why I stress a lot on this, that understanding how your mind works, what type of processes you use in your mind to make decisions is so important, because it will help you unlock your true potential. You will be able to perform at your optimal when you know how your mind works and how to break your personality. First, you need to understand your personality. Then slowly we understand how to break that personality so that you can become all that you can be. All right. Now, again, a little bit of how the dominant function, it can be like I'm an INFP. So my dominant function is introverted feeling. I tend to be very authentic. I I tend to make decisions via my understanding my personal values, emotions, and authenticity is very key to me. So that's your dominant function for me, INFP. Now, this is the function that you develop between 0 to 12 years. All right, you naturally use this, it shapes your world's view, and you tend to overuse this function. You don't even realize that it's very special, it's just how things are for you. Then, during your teenage and young adult phase, 13 to 25, your auxiliary develops. All right, so your auxiliary function would develop in this range. Then in adulthood, your tertiary function develops 25 to 40, and after 40, your inferior function would develop. For example, for INFP, like my childhood, I'm an INFP personality, so my dominant function is introverted feeling. So I have always, like to, I tend to feel things very deeply. I always like to be authentic, and I always wanted to make decisions based on what are my values and my principles. So that's an introverted feeling function. Then during my teen and young adulthood, I most of my extroverted intuition function was developing. I started exploring different possibilities, ideas, new perspectives. I would read a lot. I would explore different uh, ideas, thoughts to improve my own understanding of things. And at that time, I did not know that what is auxiliary, what is introverted feeling, but this happened very naturally for me. So we all, without knowing, we tend to develop these functions in our life, and we just can't name those things. All right. Now, also, uh, after your young adulthood phase is done, when you are in your 25 to 40 adult phase, then you tend to develop your tertiary functions. For INFPs, it would be developing a sense of having routines, taking care of your health, being more consistent, and developing attention to detail. And once you're above 40, you tend to naturally develop your inferior function. You learn for INFP, it would be growing their extroverted thinking, which is learning to how to organize, plan, and execute goals efficiently. It's also very important to note that the age ranges are very approximate. Some people tend to develop faster and some are slower depending on their life experiences, challenges, self-awareness, depending on the family they are born with. If you are already studying these functions, then you might know what is your weaknesses, so you can proactively work on them. So that increases your speed of growth as well. So a lot of factors are into play when you consider the growth of a particular person. All right. Now, how do we decide the hierarchy of different functions? Like how do I know that, for ISFJ, introverted sensing is the dominant, extroverted feeling is auxiliary, and introverted thinking is tertiary, and extroverted intuition is inferior? How do I decide the hierarchy? So it's very simple. We would be discussing the rules to determine the cognitive function stack. How is the four-letter code converted to different cognitive function stack? Okay. Now, I have designed a flowchart for deriving different cognitive function stack. So the first thing we start with is we look at the last letter of the personality type. The P, it's either would be a P or J. If it's a J, then see, you have to first look at the last letter of the code. It tells you which one of the two of the middle letters is extroverted, right? So if you have TJ in the code, it indicates extroverted thinking is a preferred process of judgment. So now we are just discussing about J. If you have J as the last letter, then you have to look at your judging function, which is your T versus F. So if it's a TJ, then you have extroverted thinking as your preferred process of judgment. Or if it's FJ, then extroverted feeling is the preferred process of judgment. All right. For J, if it's a J, you have to determine, it will tell you which of the judging function is extroverted. If it's F, it's extroverted feeling is the function that you extrovert. If it's T, then extroverted thinking is the function that you tend to extrovert in the world. Now, if the letter is P, then your information gathering, it will determine which of your information gathering process is extroverted. So if it is a P, then that tells you that the S or N in the code is used in the external world. So S-P is in the code indicates extroverted sensing is a preferred process of perception for that pattern. And N-P in the code indicates extroverted intuiting is the preferred process for perception in that type pattern. Now, again, I'll explain it with the example. Now, just look at the flow of how things are determined. So after knowing which is the preferred function for extroverting in the world, you identify the extroverted process. All right, now that you have determined which process is extroverted, know that the remaining middle letter in the code is introverted. So you identify the introverted process. Now you do, you look at the first letter E or I. All right, if the first letter is E, then the extroverted process that we had identified before is the leading process of the personality, or it is the dominant. Or if the letter is I, then the introverted process that we had identified before in step 2 is the leading process or dominant in the personality. So E if the person has E as the first letter of personality, then the extroverted process is dominant. If they have I, then the introverted process is the dominant. Now, once you decide the dominant, the remaining process would be your auxiliary. Then you can determine the tertiary by giving the dichotomous opposite of your auxiliary. And then you have to, your inferior function is basically, you can determine the inferior function. It is the dichotomous opposite of dominant. And to get the 5th to 8th function, you have to just take the hierarchical sequence of the primary process and reverse the attitude of the process. All right, that's the end. So again, I'll explain it with 2 different examples. Let's see the derivation of ESFP. So for ESFP, the last letter is P. All right, so that's perceiving. So now, if it's P, then it is going to decide what is the perceiving function that you tend to extrovert in the world. So the perceiving functions tend to be the second letter S or N. So right now it's senses, right? It is sensing. So this process, this will determine that they tend to use extroverted sensing in the function, all right? Now the remaining middle letter is F, that would be introverted, and that's introverted feeling because it is F type, so it is introverted feeling. Now you look at the first letter E. Now E is extroverted. That means the extroverted process that we had identified before would be dominant. So extroverted sensing in this case would be dominant. And the remaining process would be identified as auxiliary. So introverted feeling would be auxiliary. Now to determine tertiary, that would be opposite of auxiliary or dichotomous opposite of auxiliary. So opposite of FI would be TE, all right, extroverted thinking. And to determine the inferior, it would be the opposite of dominant. And dominant we had determined is extroverted sensation. Opposite of SC would be NI, introverted intuition. Now we have determined dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, inferior. We just have to take them and flip their attitudes. So you have first process as extroverted sensing, flip the attitude, introversion versus extroversion. Flip the attitude, you get introverted sensing. We have extroverted thinking, then extroverted feeling, and then introverted intuition. That's the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th process. Now, final stack would be this, right? Similarly, if we look at ISFJ, now here the last letter is J. So J is judging, and it will determine which of the judging function is extroverted in this personality. So the judging function is F or versus T. So right now we have an F here. The preference for judgment is feeling. So this function would be extroverted, right? So it would be an extroverted feeling that is extroverted in the world. And the remaining letter would be introverted, which is, we have an S here. So it would be introverted sensing. Now we determine the first letter I. So it's an introvert. So introversion. So the 2 processes that we had identified before, extroverted feeling, introverted sensing, and now we have determined the first letter is I. So the introverted process identified before would be your dominant. So introverted sensing would be dominant. And the remaining process would be your auxiliary. Once you identify dominant, the remaining one would automatically take place of your auxiliary. Now, again, determining the tertiary, you have to just make it, it is the opposite of your auxiliary, the dichotomous opposite. Dichotomous opposite of extroverted feeling is introverted thinking. And then to determine the 4th function or inferior, it's the opposite of your dominant. Dichotomous opposite of introverted sensing is extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition. So that gives you first, second, third, fourth function. And to get the shadow, you have to just flip the attitude. Shadow is your basically fifth to eighth function. So you flip the attitudes, you get these functions. So the final function would be, final stack would be this. Now it's a lot to understand. So if you are not still clear, then I would suggest you to pause the video and go back and try to revise it once again, how the derivation stands. But as you practice more and more, it will be much easier for you. All right. So that's the derivation of the hierarchy of different functions, the cognitive function stack. Now we would do a quick comparison between Jung's theory and what is MBTI. All right. So now Jung's psychological types was created by Carl Jung. All right. Whereas MBTI was created by Catherine Cooks Briggs and Isabel Myers-Briggs. They were a mother-daughter duo. Now MBTI is based on Carl Jung's work. Carl Jung's theory is the original theory. MBTI is based on it. Now, in Jung, we have 8 cognitive functions, whereas in MBTI, we have 16 different personality types. That's the primary reference. And in MBTI, it's a very simplified version of Jung. So if you have to determine the personality type of an individual, it's always, you can start, you can first initially use the MBTI code, the 4-letter code to determine a person's type. But as you mature, if you tend to understand more about different personality types, if you start studying Jung, then it will help you determine more accurately the other person's type. It is through your cognitive function that you get a real understanding of how a personality works. So it's always beneficial for you to study psychological types. Yeah. So you can think of it as Jung is the engine. All right. Jung's psychological type is basically the engine, and MBTI is your car model that you drive based on your different strengths and preferences. So MBTI type is your car model, how people recognize your personality, whereas cognitive functions is how the mind works behind the scenes to drive you. So again, MBTI is a very simplified version of what we know as psychological types. It takes a bit more of hard work to understand Jung's theory. Normally, people start by just understanding what is MBTI type. Slowly, they move to Jung. But once you get a understanding of it, you will be able to determine many things in the world, and it will also help immensely in your own personal growth. Okay. Now we would also discuss about the 8 function model. We had discussed the 4 primary processes, the first, second, third, and fourth function. But that's the first 4 function are only half the story of how consciousness arranges itself. We use total of 8 functions, of all the 8 functions that Carl Jung had talked about. All right, so there are 16 types of personalities, and each type represents a unique, predictable pattern of how 8 processes are used in everyday life. So your 5th to 8th function is your shadow. Now, the shadow is the repressed part of ourselves because it is very incompatible with the person's moral values. It retains from time to time and expresses feelings, motives, desires, and ambitions that the person has long since decided are unworthy because they do not accord with the individual's ideas of how people should be, how people should feel, let alone behave. Since it is usually not owned as a part of the person, it is repressed badly, so it comes out in very antagonistic, paradoxical, depreciating, and destructive ways. It's an unconscious part of us, and again, it's very much suppressed within us, and it uh, it is also the thing that if you understand what your shadow processes are. If you try to look within you, what you have tend to repress over the years, it will help you become a much mature person. It will help you grow psychologically a lot. The, okay, there are many things that we tend to repress within us, like let's say, for example, for men are taught to repress their feeling functions, repress their feelings and to act very manly. So they tend to be more thinking, and so they tend to repress their feeling part. And whereas for women, they are, they are asked to be good. They are asked to be the nice girl and the good girl. So they tend to repress a lot of their anger emotion. They tend to repress their thinking function. They tend to be more feeling people. So the culture, kind of culture and different things make you a certain type of person. But in that process, you tend to repress many things in yourself. You tend to repress a major part of your identity. So all of that repressed stuff will form your shadow. All right. Think of shadow processes as being situated just deep down the stack. It's like the iceberg in the underwater. And so for different 16 types of personalities, we have different shadows. Now I have highlighted that here. We will also talk more about how shadow impacts us in the upcoming classes. But right now, this much is enough for you to know that your first, second function is basically your conscious mind. Third and fourth function tend to be, subconscious. You are a bit aware of them, but not completely aware. So that's your tertiary inferior. And then unconscious mind is your shadow, or that iceberg, which is beneath the water, something you're not aware of. But if you tend to be aware of it, then nothing like it. If you tend to consciously access the function, then you can, you know, uh, become even an enlightened person. But it's of course not that easy because it is so repressed. We tend to have very high resistance towards accessing it. So you need to overcome all the resistance. But it's very important to understand this in the basics, because uh, generally we tend to live, just as I said before, your first two functions make 90% of your personality. And that's just one fourth of your reality. And that's a very limited way of living life, just using two of your eight functions. It's a very limited way. Ego, our ego is generally made up of very small things, and it's a very limited way of living life, and that's not worth it. I would say, if you have been given one life, then let's use 100% of your potential. Let's understand what our shadow functions are. Let's understand what are our weak functions, and let's try to build the competency in those functions so that you can live to your fullest. So that's my main idea behind starting that series as well. So we will get into more depth in the further classes, but I hope you got the basic understanding of different MBTI codes and what are primary functions, how we derive the cognitive function stack, how is the eight function model represented, what are shadow functions, a basic idea of things. And that's all for today's class. In the next module, it would be the fifth module. In the next module, I'll discuss the 16 MBTI types in detail, and I'll also discuss the criticism and limitations of MBTI and what are the common and misunderstandings, where MBTI is useful and where it falls short. So with that being said, I hope this class was useful. And if you have any doubt, please let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching till the end, and see you in the next class.